everybody, my name is Hollis and welcome to my channel, Watercolor with me. Today we are going to be going over a little bit on how to kind of layer paint to create a scene, and that can be done in a couple different ways, either by doing a more like illustrative style, which includes like inks, kind of blocking out shapes and areas and then just layering color in that way, and then also kind of just building up just on watercolor alone. So these are a couple pieces I've done before. And I do have a little bit of a very light sketch here of something I'm going to paint today that's going to kind of go over it. So we'll just jump right in. I have a little selection of color on my palette. I have ultramarine blue, I have burnt umber, I have a sap green, yellow ochre, a lemon yellow I think this one is, and then a nice true red, and then like an orange tone as well. Got my water, I got my paintbrushes, and I'm kind of ready to jump in. So I have on this, I don't know if you can see it, but I did a quick sketch with just a normal pencil, and then I went through and erased the lines just a little bit so that they wouldn't be quite as intense where I didn't want it to be. So I drew a line where I kind of want my horizon line to be. I did a little sketch of an outline of like a building, and then everything else I'm kind of leaving blank because I want to build on that. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to start by just wetting the paper a little bit. I'm going to use a nice wide brush because I want nice even strokes, because I'm going to do just a really light background. So when you're working with watercolor, it's really important to start light and then build color on top of that, because with watercolor, once you apply pigment or paint to the paper, it's kind of tricky to pull it up and bring it back to the original white. So it's really important that if you are doing a scene or you're trying to build elements, you want to start lighter and add more pigment as you go, because it's a lot easier to make it darker than it is to make it lighter, because there really isn't a lot you can do about that unless you start adding different types of paint. So I'm going to do a little bit of a gray here in the sky. Not super dark, but just not as vibrant of a blue. I live in an area that's a little bit more of a rainforest, so I'm used to painting more grayscapes than sunsets and things. I'm just going to go ahead and give a nice coat of color here. I'm going to try to avoid this section here because this is a building I want to have in here. And this is the building I referenced. I actually can see it from my apartment, but I am not quite, it's not going to be quite a true representation of the building in its normal area, so I'm kind of superimposing it on this page as a more of a focal point. So I have a nice light layer there. I'm going to go ahead and add a few tinges of some different colors, just because throughout the day, even when it is a cloudy day, you do get some slight color variations in the sky with the clouds. So you might have a little bit more purples or more of a warm tone if there's light coming in behind the clouds. So I'm going to do kind of a mix of a warmer cloud and a cooler cloud, just because the light likes to reflect off of each other. So I have a little bit more yellow in here on this one than this one. So this one's a little bit more of a purpley tone, and this one's a little darker. So I'm just doing really nice and light. I don't want to oversaturate yet. And then down here, I'm envisioning this kind of being water and almost like a beach. So I'm gonna go ahead and go in with just a slightly darker shade of that gray that I was working with. So I'm just gonna kind of increase the amount of pigment in my water. Let me grab scrap paper here. Okay. So what I'm doing is kind of figuring out my water control here. So with this, it's a very similar shade to that paint that I already put down, but because the brush isn't quite as wet, it's going to lay down a lot darker. So if I water that down, that's going to be a much lighter tone. So I kind of want it to be a little bit of a darker contrast because I want to start building some of that light and dark balance that I want in my painting, but I'm not trying to go too far. And this area is still a little wet, So if the water runs into the sky a little bit, I'm okay with that. I'm just gonna kind of pick where I want the water to go. I'm gonna do kind of a golden color, a grayish golden color for the beach itself, for the sand and some rocks. So I want to make sure I'm adding a few areas of white to make sure that that is either where the light is reflecting later or where I am putting in maybe as like a sandbar, sand berm kind of a thing, where the ocean floor has some settling there. So far it's not super exciting, I know, but just a nice light base color here. So now I'm going to go in and mix up a little bit of a brownish yellow, kind of a grayish yellow, I guess. And I'm using the yellow ochre, burnt umber, and a little bit of that ultramarine blue. So that's kind of a nice, by comparison, a warmer yellow tone, but it's not like solid yellow, like if I was just using the straight up pigment there. So I'm just kind of testing it to see how light or dark it is before I put it on the page. I kind of want to warm it up a little bit more, because with watercolors you can always kind of tone down a color by doing a layer on top of it later, but if you want that base color to shine through later, you need to make sure it's a little bit more vibrant. So I'm kind of going for an in-between there, getting closer. All right, and I'm actually gonna go ahead and just go in now and put some of that in. I'm okay if there's a little bit of overflow here into the water, just because water is transparent and sometimes you see that coming through. I'm just going to go ahead and bring that all the way up to the base of where I have decided I want my building to be, and then a little bit over here too. Maybe we'll make that a little bit more blended into each other there for a different effect. So one of the things I'm doing with this too is I do have my trusty painting rag over here that I am wiping my brushes on as I go. And so this painting, I haven't really thought it out all the way through, just a heads up there. So you're kind of learning and painting with me as I'm figuring out how I want this painting to go. But this is more just as a study, so you guys can kind of get an idea of how to layer paints and also how to work with the paint and against the paint, depending on what you want to do. So I'm going to go in here because I did notice I missed a spot and just start adding in a few more shadows. So this is still a little bit on the wet side, and I just want to add a few areas of color here to kind of show some light bouncing off of things as water and light reflect off of each other quite a bit. So we're adding a little bit there. You can make it a little darker here where you're getting some of those sand bermy bits, almost like a little shadow being created there. Just gonna do that. And then I might put in some mountains here too. That's why I kind of put a horizon line in, because otherwise when the water just meets the sky, it's going to get lost into itself. So I might go ahead and switch to a flat brush, which is what I'm using right now. So nice and square brush tip. Can get some nice straight lines, which is good for mountains. And I'm just going to kind of keep it in that colorway right now, because I just want it to be a hint of those. So the paper is a little wet. I don't know if you can tell, but there is a little bit of a bulge happening. So this center area is raised a little bit more than the rest of the page is still a little bit on the wet side. So kind of controlling the watercolor and how much water and paint is on your brush is really important. So I tend to go a little bit, I use a lot of water to mix the color, but then I will either kind of pull out some of that excess water so I get a nice crisp dry brush, or I will leave it just medium damp so I'm getting more solid strokes there. And that's something that will take practice. Because even sometimes if I'm working on something and sometimes I still use way too much water. So like it's a thing. So just mixing up a good mix of that kind of gray tone. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm just going to lighten it up a little bit, adding a little bit more water. I'm just going to go ahead and go in, just kind of add the suggestion of something over here. And so you notice that the water is, or the page is still a little damp here, so that's why it's kind of spreading and not doing a nice harsh line, which is okay. I'm a fan of foggy painting, so that's kind of up my alley. So I'm going to go ahead and deepen that just a little bit because it is a little lighter than I'd like it to be. So I'm just going to go back in, mix up some more of that color. I'm just using whatever water is on the palette, so that way it is enhancing the color, and I'm just gently pulling that color down so that way it's a little bit of a higher or more densely pigmented amount of color that I'm depositing onto the page with my brush. So doing that. So you can see all over here the page is a little drier, and that's why I'm getting more of a solid line, and that is totally fine by me. So now I'm going to work on this building a little bit, and that's going to give this half of the page a little bit of time to dry. And I think I'm going to make this building a little bit of kind of a muted orange. So to kind of tone down colors, you kind of add a little bit of a complementary color, but it is kind of nice to just use a few colors in a palette. So I'm really only using like 3 or 4 colors today. So I'm going to go ahead and mix in a little bit of that yellow ochre until I get the color that I want. I feel like I want it to just be a touch brighter. It's like a rust color. It's getting closer. Okay. Pull in some of that blue to tone it down just a hint more. There we go. That's what I want. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of block in and pull in the shapes. I have some very, very subtle guidelines here for the roof line of this little house, so I'm going to make the sides of the building this kind of orangey color. I'm just doing some short, precise strokes here. I'll add more details in later, but I'm just kind of blocking out where I want those edges of the building to be. There's going to be a little deck on it too. I'm going to have it being on stilts, it is in a watery area, so we want to make sure that the water is able to go all around it, almost like a cannery, like an old cannery building. And then I'm going to go in and I'm just going to take a little bit of this burnt umber, mix it in with a little bit of blue just to tone it down so it's not quite as warm. I'm going to use that to kind of create the look of the pilings or the stilts that it's on, and I'm just going to use the full length of this brush to do that. So I'm going to put it where it would obviously be, which is going to be on the corners of this little building here. And there. And then because of perspective, kind of mess that up, so that's why it's good to have a rag on hand. Just dab that out. I'm not going to worry about this little area here too much where it's a little splotchy. That's okay, we'll just tap it out. Go back in, get some more of that color. I'm just going to do a suggestion of some stilts back here as well, because the building's going to go, you know, all the way back. And I'm okay with it being a little lighter down here right now, because I will just kind of add in a little bit of a shadow and darken that up. So, hi, I'm filming. I can edit this out though. How you do? Cool. They're in that bin. All the clean ones are right there. In the plastic tote. It's like there were. I did them, I swear.
Why?
Okay, bye. Okay. So, because I want this to be completely dry before I do the next layer, I am going to go in with my hair dryer and just speed that process up. All right, so I've let this completely dry. I use my hair dryer to speed up the process. So now we're able to go back in and add more depth to the scene and add more defined areas. So I'm going to go back in a little bit of a deeper gray, this kind of similar gray that I was been doing earlier. And I'm just going to go ahead and add some more defined areas of this so we kind of get a better feel of that horizon line and that water break. So I'm going ahead and go in with this guy, add some nice solid strokes of color, let it blend into itself. I'm going to make that pop up a little bit more here. Carrying that all the way over as well. Might go in and actually do a little bit of a lighter version of that back here to make it look like there's a little bit of a mountain behind there as well. Just going to do that gently. There we go. And I'm just ever so slightly bringing it close to the one I just painted in front of it. I don't want it to go all the way into it though, because then it's going to bleed into itself. So a little bit of control there for that. And I'm going to go ahead and use that same color, just lightening it up a little bit with some more water. I'm going to go ahead and kind of do a little bit of a reflection, kind of mimic that color and shape of the mountain behind it, so that way it looks like it is reflecting in the water there. Okay, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to go ahead and work on doing the roof of this building. And that one, I just want that to be a nice dark gray. I don't want it to be super colorful, so I'm going to go in with a good amount of that burnt umber and that ultramarine and just really get a nice deep dark amount of color on my brush here, so that's nice and dark. I'm going to dry the brush off just a little bit there on the paper to get it where I want it to be. I'm going to go ahead in and we're going to do a little line here for that part of the roof and here. And I'm going to go ahead and bring that all the way over to there, and you can kind of play around that. There's a little bit of not quite matching where I want it to be, but that's okay. I can fill that in with the red later. And so I'm going to go ahead and draw this part of the roof line there. I'm just going to go ahead and fill that in a little bit with my brush here. I'm not going to make it completely gray because I want some variation there. So we've got a little bit of that, going, and now I'm going to go in with the same color and pick up a little bit of that red that I had mixed up earlier. It just kind of dried on my palette here, so I'm okay with that. And I'm just going to make up more of a brown color. So if you can see those compared next to each other, it's like a darker version of that. I'm just going to use that to add some details here on the edge of the building. So there and there, and then a little bit here, because there will be a shadow from that roof line on this building as well. Do that. I'm just going to put a little bit of lines to indicate siding here as well. In real life, the building that I'm mimicking off this is actually yellow, so you know. And then make sure I'm kind of following perspective here. It's a little darker than I wanted it to be. One thing to remember with watercolors is that things do tend to dry lighter than when you put them down. So I'm actually going to, but I am going to pull that up just a little bit. It's not quite where I need it to be. So I'm actually going to re-wet that whole thing and pull some of that water off. So, okay. Moving on to a different area, because I have wet paint here. I have wet paint here. So I'm going to work a little bit on this beach area. So again, going in with my yellow ochre here, mixing it in with just a little bit of that brown earlier. There we go. That's a nice color. I'm going to go ahead and go in and I'm just going to add a little bit of texture here. Make it a little darker as I go. Adding just some variation of light. We're just kind of playing with this one. We're not doing a super serious painting for me, so I'm just having fun with this. Just adding some dark and light spots, get that variation, make it look like this sand is a little bit on the wet side. I am going to go in with some texture later in this video, so, and I'm going to do some splatter work there. And I'm just going to kind of do that. The thing when you're painting too is you have to kind of remember about perspective. So like when you're looking out somewhere across from you, mountains and things that are close up are going to be super vibrant and like really in focus, and things that are further away tend to be a little bit more faded out with atmosphere, what's called atmospheric perspective. And so as you look further out, things kind of get faded as you get closer to that horizon line. So this front section here is going to get darker while I'm painting, and this area I'm going to keep nice and light. So I might not touch the sky again at any point in this painting. We'll see how I feel about it. But so I'm going to go back in. I'm going to use the same brush because this is a really nice brush for getting some good lines. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to that gray that I've been working with, just so I want it to be a little bit more on that blue watery side. Okay, a little bit more. I want it to be nice and light. I don't want it to be too heavy. And I'm just going to go ahead and go through here, and I'm going to do a little bit of what's called the dry brush technique. So with your brush, you're going to want most of that. You want pigment on it, but you don't want it to be liquidy. That way, if you kind of do a quick drag across the page like this, you kind of get that texture going. So what I'm going for is to help create a little bit more of that water texture here. So you got to move fast with that. So you got to kind of commit. And you're like just kind of barely grazing the surface with that brush for that. If you want a little bit more depth in some areas or some deeper, you can go ahead and just use that very, very fine edge of that brush and just kind of tap it to get some nice straight lines. So there might be a little bit more water movement there. There might be something under the water that's a little deeper. I'm going to go ahead and with that same color, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more here, because as you get closer to the shore, you tend to have a little bit more of that ripple effect coming off of the shoreline. And again, this is closer, so I want to make sure I'm getting a little bit more depth of color here. So I'm going in with a little bit more of that pigment, a little bit more of that color. Starting to come alive now. It's not quite as one-dimensional. I'm going to actually go in with a little bit of a finer pointed brush here, and I'm going to go ahead and do some more shadow work under here. So for that, what I want to do, because I want it to be kind of a soft shadow, is I'm actually going to go in here with the brush just wet with water, and I'm going to kind of spread it around. And then I'm going to go in here and get more of that brownish gray that we've been doing. Test it out here. a little darker than I want, a little bit more water. And I'm just going to go in here. I'm just going to tap here to kind of create that shadow happening. Show that this is off the ground a little bit. And it's going to just kind of softly cascade into the rest of the scene, because I don't want it to have a harsh shadow, because when it's a foggy day, you don't tend to have a super harsh shadow going on there. Okay, I'm going to grab another brush that's a little bit smaller but still has this kind of square feature to it. So this guy here, make sure it's clean, make sure there's nothing on it. I'm going to go in with some of this gray that I keep mixing up. This is why I go through so much blue, as you can tell, because it's really good for shadows and it's really good for, yeah, it's a really nice neutral blue and it does really great. So this is an old, like, abandoned building. So there would be a door here, but there might not be stairs leading out of it. So I'm just kind of adding a little bit of that. There might be a window or two here. So I'm just gonna put those there. Maybe there's a window over here. Maybe there used to be a door here. Go ahead and add that there, just to add a little bit more depth to this building. And with the same brush too, I'm gonna go ahead and go in and just do another layer on top of that roof. Give it some more life. And this is when I left that white there, I left it there on purpose, so that way if I do go over it, it doesn't completely darken the entire roof line. And you can do this a couple different ways. You can just not put paint there too. And I'm just gonna go ahead and drag some of that down. Make it nice and soft shadows. Nice soft shadows there. And so this shadows dispersed a little bit, but there's definitely gonna be a little bit more here where that light kind of fades away. And I know it looks like I've just kind of completely gone over the stilts that the house is on, and that's fair because I did. But I'm going to go in later after this dries a little bit more on this side and enhance those a little bit more. So I'm going to go back to my mountain over here because he is now dry. And this is how I paint. A lot of people will just do one layer at a time, move on, come back to it, but I like to work in a couple different areas of the painting at once. That way I am keeping my values about the same and I can build as I go. Just making sure I'm getting a nice deep color now, because I'm kind of getting into what I'm calling my last layer, at least on this mountainy area. So it's still soft and it's still there, but I'm just adding a little texture to it. So I'm kind of using that same dry brush technique, and I'm just going to do a little bit of kind of hashing just to give it some more texture, some tree-like things, just a little bit here and there, just to give it a little bit more, a little something extra to it. I might just go in and make some a little more darker, just kind of scatter it a little bit. And so that kind of makes that a little bit more focused there. And I'm going to go back in with some of that same color, just water it down a little bit more, and then just go ahead and kind of mimic that same depth of gray here on the water, so it's reflecting that still. And you want to leave a little bit of light spots too, because it's not an exact copy of what's going on up there. It's just enough to let you know that there's water. Okay. And then I'm going to go back in with a little bit more of this yellow ochre. And one thing I'm going to actually do now is I'm going to use this guy as a guide, and I'm going to grab another piece of paper or a paper towel or something to block this, because I want to add some speckles and texture to my painting. So I'm just going to grab any piece of paper I have, which happens to be this guy here. So what I'm going to do is do a little tester on here. So I want to add just a little texture so it looks like it's more sandy than it is. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do some little splatters of texture here and there. This is where you can kind of have some fun with the different colors, and this is how you can get a little bit more depth going. So add a little bit there, move to another spot and cover it up. That way you don't get the rest of your painting covered. A little bit there, a little bit down here. I'm just kind of using this part of the brush. And you can use a toothbrush, you can use a lot of things, but I'm basically just pulling the bristles back and letting it fly. So get a little bit more texture that way. I'm going to go in with some of that colors, those colors I was using too, and just darken up a few spots. Add a few areas. Wet sand's going to be a little darker, so this little guy, these little guys here closer to the edge are going to be darker anyway than what's happening up shore. And then this guy's dried a little bit more, so I'm going to go in with more of just a solid yellow ochre, or not yellow ochre, sorry, burnt umber, and ultramarine. I'll just go ahead and tap a little bit there. There. And this one that's a little farther should be a little faded, so I don't want it to be super strong there. And if your paper's still a little wet like mine is here, you can go in, dry your brush off a little bit, and then it's what's called a thirsty brush, because it's going to want to absorb whatever's around it. I'm going to use that to kind of clean up some of my edges on these little stilts here. I'm okay with that doing there. I'm going to go in and add a little bit of texture here so it looks like it's kind of in the water. Going with a smaller brush now just to add some more details, some more depth. Kind of keeping that same bluish brown going on. Just adding some more. More ripples happening here. And then sometimes, depending on how I'm feeling, I'll go in and do more details with an ink or pen or brush. Or if I really wanted to, I could go in with some of this on the sandy beach area. This got covered in ink, so that is definitely not the right color. Gotta be careful with that. Alright, clean that off really quick. That's why you test some stuff too before you go gung-ho. Man, this got ink on it from my pen jar. Gotta keep this separate now. Alright, lesson learned. But if I wanted to, I could go in with this texture on the side of this and just add just a little bit more graininess to the sand. This is a water-soluble pencil that I'm using here, so I'm just kind of using it to add a little bit more depth to the sky. And there we go. This is always my favorite part, is pulling the tape off. It kind of makes it feel more finished. So that is a way to add more depth and layering of color to create a scene in a watercolor painting. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something. Feel free to like and subscribe. Yeah. Happy painting. Enjoy.